As tensions in trade and technology between China and the United States escalate, on May 1, 2024, the U.S. Treasury and State Department issued a series of sanctions against Russia, including as many as dozens of Chinese companies. These companies were accused of providing almost all the military supplies needed for Russia's war machine, including drones, optical equipment, and chemical weapons materials. Zhuhang Evasion, headquartered in Shenzhen, was accused of exporting a large number of military drones and related technologies, a significant portion of which ultimately ended up in the hands of the Russian military. Several high-end companies in Wuhan were accused of supplying a large number of key components, such as chips and sensors, to Russian military enterprises. Some chemical companies in Hebei were accused of selling military chemicals, such as nitrocellulose, to Russia. Furthermore, Zhongcheng Heavy Equipment Company provided substantial combat supplies to the Wagner Group, a private military company. Looking at this list of sanctions, it's clear that Chinese companies are backing Russia's war machine. In order to evade sanctions, Chinese companies use shell companies in Hong Kong, Slovakia, the United Arab Emirates, and other places to disguise military goods as civilian goods, first smuggling them to third countries and then transferring them to Russia through various means. Some companies even conceal their Chinese background and register shell companies overseas, posing as foreign companies engaged in arms trading. Some companies also hide the trading process through proxies and fund pools. However, as more and more countries begin to cooperate with the U.S. sanctions, these tricks have become precarious. Today, except for a few countries, China can hardly find a safe haven for its military supply channel. The goal of these U.S. sanctions is to uproot the vast network of Chinese military assistance to Russia. The sanctions not only involve companies directly involved in the trade of military products, but also institutions that provide funding, logistics, and technical support. It is estimated that these sanctions will affect tens of thousands of Chinese businessmen and officials, and secondarily affect millions of people. For Chinese companies accustomed to operating in the gray area, this is like a heavy blow. In the short term, they will find it difficult to rebuild such a vast and secretive military aid network. What's more troubling for the Chinese government is that this list of sanctions also includes several Chinese companies that provide equipment for Russia's bio and chemical weapon manufacturing. In the Ukrainian battlefield, the Russian military has been repeatedly accused of using chemical weapons, such as the asphyxiating agent chlorine, despite Russian denials. Once Russia's use of chemical weapons is confirmed by the international community, China will be hard-pressed to avoid blame and inevitably incur more severe sanctions. By then, it's possible that Chinese banks will be banned from using the international SWIFT banking system. Senior officials at the White House revealed that the Biden administration is considering cutting off some of Chinese banks' access to the system. If this happens, the impact would be unimaginable. Since its establishment in 1973, this institution based in Belgium has played the role of a behind-the-scenes manipulator of global financial transactions. Today, more than 11,000 financial institutions in over 200 countries and regions are connected to the SWIFT network, processing up to 40 million transactions per day. As the world's second-largest economy and a major trading nation, more than half of China's foreign payments and settlements rely on the SWIFT system. It can be said that China's economic lifeline is closely linked to this Western-dominated financial infrastructure, and the consequences of a sudden separation would be disastrous. If China is deprived of SWIFT, its export-oriented economy will suffer a devastating blow. Currently, nearly all of China's imports of commodities such as chips, oil, iron ore, and soybeans are priced in US dollars and settled through the SWIFT system. Once this critical channel is lost, Chinese companies will find it difficult to purchase materials from the international market. Modern industry runs on chips. From smartphones, computers, to cars, and industrial robots, the operation of every intelligent device relies on chip support. Currently, 90% of China's chips are imported, with chip imports reaching a staggering $430 billion in 2022, accounting for over 60% of the global chip trade volume. These chips mainly come from foreign giants such as TSMC, Samsung, Intel, Qualcomm, and Nvidia, and procurement settlements must be in US dollars. Once kicked out of SWIFT, chip costs for Chinese companies will multiply. This will not only lead to a chip supply crisis in many domestic industries, but also seriously weaken the export competitiveness of Chinese products in European and American markets. Last year, China's exports of two categories of products, including mobile phones and computers, to the United States exceeded $55 billion and $40 billion respectively. If imported chips are difficult to obtain or extremely expensive, not only will key industries in China suffer, but the export capabilities to Europe and America will also be greatly weakened. Most Taiwanese-funded enterprises in China use imported chips to complete product assembly and then export to the European and American markets. Given U.S. financial sanctions, these Taiwanese-funded enterprises may accelerate their withdrawal from mainland China, taking away a large amount of tax revenue and job opportunities. This will undoubtedly be a huge blow to China's position in the global electronics industry. The electric vehicle industry would also be hit. Traditional fuel vehicles require 500 to 600 chips per vehicle, a number that exceeded 1,000 by 2021. EVs require over 2,000 chips per vehicle, a number that is expected to further increase to 3,000 to 5,000 in the future. Vehicle-grade chips are far superior to ordinary consumer electronic chips in terms of design, manufacturing, packaging, and testing standards. They must meet the strict requirements of the automotive industry for reliability, safety, and environmental adaptability. Among them, the global automotive-grade MCU microcontroller unit chip is the core of automotive electronic systems. It integrates key components such as CPU, RAM, ROM, timers, and communication interfaces, and can independently run control programs, real-time monitor, and precisely control key systems such as engines, transmissions, brakes, and steering. However, 98% of vehicle-grade MCUs are monopolized by 7 giants, including Japan's Renesas, the Netherlands' NXP, Germany's Infineon, the United States' Cypress, Texas Instruments, Microchip Technology, and ST Microelectronics. Chinese companies have no choice but to purchase these critical chips in US dollars. Once Chinese banks are kicked out of the SWIFT system, China's industry will suffer a devastating blow and will be unsustainable. China also heavily relies on high-end equipment from countries like Japan, Switzerland, and Germany for CNC machine tools. These machine tools are widely used in everything from ordinary manufacturing to high-end military and aerospace fields. If China loses access to these tools, the breadth and depth of the impact will span several industries, effectively ending China's status as the world's factory. The outlook for agricultural products is also worrisome. With the acceleration of urbanization and reliance on a consumer economy, China's dependence on food imports is rapidly increasing. In particular, crops such as soybeans, corn, and wheat, which are used for animal feed, need to be imported in large quantities from countries like the United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Canada every year to meet consumption demands. It is estimated that China's food self-sufficiency rate has dropped from 93.6% in 2000 to around 62% currently, and this huge gap needs to be largely filled through international trade priced in US dollars. According to customs statistics, China's agricultural imports reached a staggering $250.8 billion in 2022, with agricultural imports from Russia last year amounting to only $7.6 billion, which can only meet 3.7% of China's total agricultural imports that year. Even if Russia exports all its agricultural products to China, nearly 80% of the grain still needs to be imported from countries other than Russia, which means China still needs to use the US dollar for trade. If China is kicked out of the SWIFT system, agricultural prices will skyrocket. China's dependence on imported seeds is even more serious than its dependence on imported chips. Take, for example, Keshan County in Heilongjiang Province, known as the hometown of Chinese potato seedlings. Although the county has over 100 years' history of potato planting, more than half of the current planting area, almost 5,000 acres, uses the Atlantic variety imported from the United States. The main grain crop in northern China is similarly heavily dependent on foreign seeds. The hybrid corn variety Xianyu 335 by the American company Pioneer occupies a dominant position in the main corn-producing areas in northeast and North China, up to 80% in some regions. In addition to potatoes and corn, China's dependence on imported seeds for vegetables such as chili peppers, onions, carrots, eggplants, tomatoes, and broccoli is also very high, with many excellent varieties actually controlled by seed companies in countries like the Netherlands and Israel. China imports a large number of grain and vegetable seeds every year from multinational seed giants like Monsanto, Pioneer, and Switzerland's Syngenta, and almost all of these trades are priced in US dollars, making it impossible to settle in rubles or renminbi. In the analysis above, it is not difficult to see that the looming U.S. financial sanctions against China may involve all aspects of China's macroeconomic operation, directly affecting whether the country can operate normally. Faced with the escalating sanctions from the United States, the Chinese banking industry has already begun to take evasive actions. Banks in China, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates are taking extra caution with Russian clients to avoid crossing the red line of U.S. sanctions. According to Russian officials, Chinese banks have suspended most of their financial transactions with Russia, and state-owned giants like Sinopec have also encountered delays or even refusals in fund transfers when exporting oil and fuel to Russia. Many Chinese companies that have business dealings with Russia are currently facing difficulties in receiving payments due to the sanctions. This shows that although the sanctions have not officially begun, their negative impact on Sino-Russian economic and trade relations has already begun to show. Cross-border settlement in US dollars currently relies mainly on the chip system located in New York, with SWIFT transmitting clearing instructions and other financial information. SWIFT is headquartered in Belgium, so if the United States wants to use this financial nuclear weapon to sanction China, it also needs the approval of the European Union. This is why Xi Jinping hastily decided to visit France in May, to explore the possibility of France speaking up for China within the EU. However, even before the meeting, President Macron had already initiated negotiations on a bilateral military access agreement between Japan and France to expand security network construction. This indicates that France will cooperate with the United States in asserting pressure on China. The Chinese government's attitude towards this is intriguing. A recent article on guanxia.cn compared SWIFT to the operating system of a smartphone, claiming that China could completely start from scratch and establish an international settlement system independent of the West. In contrast, when Kunlun Bank was banned from accessing SWIFT in 2012, the Chinese government did not make a similar statement. This shows that the Chinese government attaches great importance to the possible SWIFT sanctions this time. Being excluded from SWIFT will indeed have a significant impact on China's imports and exports, but it does not mean that China will be unable to receive and make payments in US dollars. Whether it can continue to obtain US dollars depends on whether overseas banks hold significant US dollar reserves and whether they are willing to operate through channels other than SWIFT. Banks in Western countries, such as the European Union, are unlikely to violate sanctions. As for countries with already tense relations with the United States, their banks may maintain US dollar transactions with China. However, the problem is that China's total trade with these countries is very limited, and conducting US dollar transactions with them is not meaningful. Currently, China's major trading partners are still concentrated in the United States, Japan, and Europe, all of which are within the US-led financial system and have huge trade surpluses with China. They control China's main sources of obtaining US dollars. Once these countries respond to the US's call to encircle and sanction China's supply of US dollars will face severe challenges. It can be seen from the above analysis that the article on Guanxa's website aims to reassure the Chinese public that even if SWIFT is lost, there will be no major problems. The purpose is to prevent bank runs and a rush on US dollars on the black market. The Chinese government has invested a large amount of funds to maintain domestic financial stability. The rise of Hong Kong stocks and the A-share market are receiving government support. Therefore, many people suggest withdrawing as soon as possible, believing that a major drop is inevitable. In addition, the Chinese government is also supporting the RMB exchange rate, which will continue to deplete foreign exchange reserves. When the reserves are depleted, the RMB exchange rate may experience a cliff-like decline. Currently, the Chinese economy is at a critical turning point, facing an exceptionally complex domestic and international situation. Domestically, the Chinese government is burdened with heavy debt, the wealth gap continues to widen, and the power struggle among various political forces is becoming increasingly intense. Internationally, potential disruptive changes such as SWIFT sanctions and the rapid rise of new technologies in the United States have cast a shadow over China's economic development. Against this backdrop, there seem to be some intriguing changes and signs of discord within the top CCP leadership. In December last year, President Xi Jinping was scheduled to visit Vietnam on the 14th, but unexpectedly, he advanced his schedule to the 12th. This move not only surprised the Vietnamese side, but also puzzled the Chinese public. It was not until April this year that the details gradually became clear. It turned out that on the opening day of the Central Economic Work Conference, after President Xi delivered his speech, he and a group of senior officials left midway and hurried to Vietnam, leaving only representatives from various departments to continue the meeting. In a recent meeting, it was noted that the economic situation is severe. Most of the suggested solutions focused on Premier Li Qiang's approach of ensuring people's livelihoods, jobs, and the economy, rather than Xi Jinping's idea of developing new productive forces. This led to a tense moment, with Xi Jinping leaving the meeting in frustration, dampening the mood. As expected, the final communiqué of the Central Economic Work Conference still prioritized Xi Jinping's development of new productive forces, with issues such as people's livelihood concerns and expanding domestic demand not being a focus of the decision-making level. This adjustment undoubtedly highlights a significant gap between leaders in China and the immediate demands of ordinary people. As early as September 1993, Li Ruihuan, then a top leader in China, highlighted that the main causes for the collapse of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe were long-lasting economic problems and stagnating living conditions. He warned the provincial government that if the economy continued to stagnate and people's livelihood issues were not effectively alleviated, the government would inevitably be abandoned by the people. Looking at China today, it's not difficult to see that its economy is deeply mired. Population aging, wealth distribution, severe overcapacity, and high and rising debt levels are a series of structural problems intertwining and plaguing economic development. These issues actually began to emerge during the period when Wen Jiabao was in power, and Chinese officials are well aware of them. Unfortunately, over the past decade or so, they have failed to attract enough attention and vigilance from the decision-making level. At the same time, under the leadership of the United States, the entire Western camp has clearly positioned China as their top strategic opponent. From significantly expanding the list of technology sanctions against China, to accelerating decoupling from China, to threatening to expel China from the SWIFT payment system, the United States is implementing a neck-crushing clampdown on the Chinese economy. If the United States and China were to come to blows in the Taiwan Strait or elsewhere, triggering a large-scale military conflict, the Chinese economy would undoubtedly be the first to suffer a devastating blow. This places the Chinese economy at a crucial crossroads. If the CCP fails to advance structural reforms in the political and economic system, the CCP is likely to fall as the Soviet Union did.